what Robert is saying, you know, and I also believe what Dr. Bailey is saying. Dr. Hill, and he's misunderstood here. And so we kind of do that for our own psyche. We do that automatically, unfortunately. And so we, you know, some of us are more, how could you say, more, more inclined to be more, our attitude is much more stronger, you know. Others are kind of the middle of the road, you know. Well, yeah, I'm a Republican, but I'm kind of in the middle here, you know. Or yes, I'm a Democrat, but I'm kind of in the middle because I don't really believe all of those things, or, you know, the extremes. So you kind of start fitting yourself in a group. And unfortunately, this leads to perceive the other group as being different, and you start feeling that you know, you start discriminating. And I don't want to say unconsciously, I don't think we do that, but you start seeing the differences. And, you know, not to belabor the point that Susan started with, the issue of the sacrificial lamb and all this kind of feeling, I think in our society we've done this from time immemorial. Unfortunately, that's part of us, of being human. Now, how to change that, you know, how to bring about change. And Dr. Smiley said the most important part of this whole process is how to change this perception is by education and by training. And you can start seeing people and believing that other groups are very similar to you, because once we start seeing the similarities between us, and once we start understanding that there are more similarities than there are differences, then we start changing our feeling and our attitude towards others. That's the only thing that's going to save us, is the persistence on education. I mean, the issue of our educational system, one of the reasons that our public education system is such the basis of our democracy is because we teach democracy in our schools. We teach our children that no one has, you know, we have to make a decision together. You know, not Dr. Hill, because he has this high degree, he's going to make the only decision, or because so-and-so is the President of the United States, he's above the law. No, we are ingrained, that is ingrained in us from the get-go. The same way we need to ingrain the fact that we are all people and we all belong to this country and we want to make it better. I think that's something that absolutely is unquestionable and is not negotiable, in other words. Once we start doing that, because obviously I've come from a country where the first thing that was totally controlled by the government was education. Why? Because here we call it, we want to educate our children in a democracy. There we called it changing people's minds, making children communists, thinking that there is no, everybody is equal, there is no, except of course, I don't really think that exists, because the people who control that absolutely do not think that, because they are not equal to some people. But anyway, that's how we change people's minds and how we educate people to becoming more tolerant of each other, seeing each other in that way. So of course the issue of identity is very important. And something came to mind yesterday where I walked in the house and my aunt and my dad were watching TV in the news, and they were watching Guillen, the manager of the Marlins, who, of course, you all know, said that Castro is just wonderful. He's been able to subsist for 50-some years. His whole, well, I really think he's a communist, but anyway, that's what people perceive him as such, and they want to put a label on him, and that's fine. But the whole structure of that debate kind of really divides people up. And so they were seeing him on TV crying and all this kind of stuff, and I'm very partial, I can't not admit it. And I said, but you don't see the issue. I mean, you have to see the whole cultural issue here. And I think the fact that there is some movement of, okay, this is the Marlins decision, how we're going to resolve this issue right now. It may not be resolved forever. There will always be that sentiment, but there was something done immediately. And I think in this case, I think this prolonging of justice, of what, what really we perceive as justice, because there are different perceptions of justice. And I wanted to get into that because since Susan talked a little bit about justice, I wanted to talk a little bit about injustice and the perception of injustice, and of course, how we perceive injustice. And there, we all of us here, probably if we ask each and every one of you, you will have a different kind of perspective of where that comes from. But the unfair processes that go on, because obviously we know that there is a law, and we know that there are civil rights in this country, and we know that when a person is thought to have committed a crime, even though he hasn't been determined to have been guilty until he is determined guilty by a court and by his peers, that is our law and that's in the Constitution, we still have perceptions that someone, and in this case, there is no perception, there is a very clear determination that Mr. Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That they want to say that, well, the law in Florida says that because there's this law now, they want to share with us the law of stand your own ground. Stand your own ground law in the state of Florida was not written for the Zimmermans of our community, because as Dr. Bailey said, yes, there are many Zimmermans in our community, and that's what is very frightening, very frightening. Because, and I think there are Zimmermans in both races, there are Zimmermans in all cultures. There are, the good and the bad everywhere. The issue then becomes, we have to hang on to something. Well, the fact that he said that he was in self-defense obviously needs to be proven in a court of law. But it seems that to us, that because you see, before this trial, this issue goes to court, we've already been through the press, and the press has, painted a picture of who did what and how it happened, and all of us are making up our minds as to exactly who's at fault here. And perhaps I don't want to rush to judgment, but I think it seems that there are very clear and convincing evidence that things are, as they happen and as we perceive them. And it's just prolonging this issue, which creates this issue of the injustice of process, because we expect for justice to be done immediately and not this prolonging. One thing I must say, because in my class, we look at a specific case that happened in Miami in the 80s, the McDuffie case, which is very similar, and I was surprised that my colleague here, Dr. Hill, did not bring it up, but since he didn't, I'm good.
There's only so many cases.
There are. Well, there are. And we read about this case in my class because we study the issue of escalation of conflict. And the escalation of conflict is very much impacted by social feelings, by attitudes, by the self prophecy of this is a guy who was running away from the police. The police was this is in the 80s. Now you need to understand Miami in the 80s. This was the time of the cocaine cowboys, and the police was later determined to have been involved in a lot of this cocaine issues and so forth and so on. So you need to really understand the culture and the times of the people. That's why you need to understand why Yang was made such an issue out of it, because you need to understand the culture of Miami, the Marlins Stadium that is costing us a bundle, and all of that comes into play into the feelings and the attitudes of people, and obviously also Sanford. I've never been to Sanford. Dr. Hill says he's lived in Sanford, and the lady the other day in Dr. Nixon's workshop or get-together indicated that she left Florida because she grew up in Sanford. And one of the good things she said was she came back to Florida because of NSU, which I thought that was kind of nice. Anyway, but be that as it may, those issues, we can't separate them from that fact. So anyway, so escalation has all of those combinations. And so in this case, the police follow McDuffie on his motorbike, and they of course realize that they are following him, and so he tries to get off the highway, and of course it was inevitable that they catch up to him. They figure that he had, don't remember if he stole the bike or he had other issues legally. I mean, this is not, a lily white person coming into the justice system with clean hands, but that's beside the point. There's where the whole thing kind of gets out of hand, and where the issues of attitudes, racism, injustices come into play. They actually beat this guy to the pulp and kill him. Okay, then that is taken into the justice system, which even then creates an even greater conflict. So this becomes like a spiral. Instead of when it goes to the justice system for them to put a top on it and say, okay, these men are guilty. Yes, they were guilty. They were taken off the force, but none of them went to jail. So that infuriated the community, correctly so. And so it created all kinds of riots in Miami, and a lot of unrest and ill feelings, and really a lot of negativism in Miami. And so in this spiral, there are several opportunities in this whole process of escalation. These are called stalemates. There are stalemate opportunities in every type of spiral. In this case, in this particular case, I was telling Dr. Davis the other day that I feel that even though there have been these things about the press, I think we're getting used to the press. I guess we're getting used to the press because I feel that the Black community is acting in a very civil and positive way. They have reached out for their churches, their pastors. They have, yes, demonstrated. You have to allow people to show their feelings somehow. So that is a very positive process. The issue where it becomes negative is now it's in the hands of the courts. Let's see what they do. And I hope we have learned something from the McDuffie case, that we really do need to put a stop. We have an opportunity here that our justice system needs to put needs to bring justice to bear. And if that happens, we're not going to bring Trayvon back. But we have moved, in my opinion, we have moved in our dealings with these kinds of tragedies. We have moved forward. In reading through some of the cases and examples, because you see, when this law, just getting back to the law a minute, this law was passed in 2005. And in northern Florida, if you haven't been there and never traveled through it long enough, people in northern Florida carry arms. I mean, they go on, they have pickups, most of the guys have pickups, and they carry their rifles hanging in the back of inside their trucks. So the gun issue in northern Florida is a very sensitive kind of thing. And so this is where the National Rifle Association has a lot of positive backing. And so that's who brought to bear this law in Florida in 2005. And obviously this law was for the self-protection of you in your home, or if you are out and about and someone is attacking you, you can defend yourself And not that you couldn't defend yourself or wouldn't before this law, but this kind of gives you the right, or without any question, et cetera, to defend yourself with a deadly weapon. It could be a gun, it could be a bat, it could be a knife, it could be any of that kind of stuff. And obviously the statistics show that since 2005, and the statistics in the article that I was reading goes up to 2010, of course there have been an increase in killings and dead people under the under this, and most of these cases, these people have not been prosecuted. Some of them have not been prosecuted. Those who have, in many instances, they have been able to hold themselves to this law in self-defense because they were attacked. So there are all kinds of examples. Children, drunkards. This drunk guy came to the house of someone and thought it was his house, and he was trying to open the door and several times, and because it looked like his house, it looked like his neighborhood, the guy comes out with a gun. This guy is the young guy, or the guy who was drunk, is 23 years old. The other guy was I don't know, maybe 47 or something. His home, his family was in his house. He comes out with a gun. And the guy who was drunk, he feels is going to attack him, and he shoots the guy. He didn't die. But, the reflection of the guy who shot this young man said later, to himself, I should have thought about this a little bit more. If I didn't have the guns, I probably would have socked him one, because he was stronger, bigger, and had the capability of doing it. One more thing, I know you want me to shut up. We have excellent books, but I just wanted to read to you since I wanted to share with you that, to piggyback on the idea that we have to really try to work everything we do, because you see, we, each one of us individually, everything we do has an impact on the person with whom we are have a relationship with. In our work, in our home, in our community, in our church, everywhere we are, if we bring this idea of bringing people closer together, they will start coming together. And according to one of the authors of our text, his name is Morton Deutsch, he says that an effective resolution will need to include mechanisms to foster reconciliation and forgiveness. This is very hard. Forgiveness is very hard. I know, I feel that myself. I don't know if I can forgive, but I know that this is the only way. In my academic, in my educated mind, I know that this is the only way that we're going to move forward. To join the opposing parties in a shared moral community and facilitate cooperative relations between them. Thank you.
Now, we've had some really great sharing here from our panel members this morning, many different perspectives. In fact, each one brought a different perspective. Susan started, please allow me to say Susan. Ask us the question, what is justice? What is, I started us thinking again on this, and whose lenses are we looking through when we discuss what justice is? And Clyde looked at this thing through the whole lens of attitude, what this is about. Robert made the statement that we do have maybe a question, that we do have a race problem, and he brought some cases before us for us to reflect on, some cases that probably most of us here remember. And then Marciana did say that racism exists, but she's really looking at ways to approach getting beyond all of that. So we have many approaches here from our panel, and now we're going to open our session up here for your comments and for your questions. If you have comments, please don't go on, and so someone else can get a chance to have their comment as well. So at this time, we're open for questions and comments to the panel. Yes.
I wanted to say that I think this is an education problem that in our schools with little kids, they are taught multiculturalism and they are taught these good things that they need to be taught. I got with all the degrees and all the formal education, I got the biggest lesson from my little son the other day. And that's how I know that our schools are doing something right and that the answer is in education. He was talking about a classmate and I said, which one is this? You know, and he described it, the classmate. And I said, is this the Korean kid? Mom, no offense, but that comment is not appropriate. And I loved it, and I looked at him, and I thought of so many ways to respond and explain to him that I was just attempting to describe the kid in a non-judgmental, but he was like, look at me like, and I know that I taught him those values at home, but I also see that his school is doing something good. I don't know how long it's going to take until this grows and our next generation is a little more educated than this one. But I'm hopeful. I come from a different country where things are much worse. People are more racist and they discriminate even more. And somebody mentioned that America is the land of opportunity, and that's why I came to this country. And I'm still happy to see that even if we do have a lot of problems here, there's hope because we're doing something about it. And the last thing I want to say is that I'm sorry for citing a bumper sticker with all the PhDs in the room, but I saw a bumper sticker once that read, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And I think that this is a case of ignorance. Yeah. That's why.
Thank you.
I like the comment about the shotguns and rifles in the backs of cars. If you grow up in the Midwest, you see that all the time, not just in Florida. And if you have to be in your 60s, you probably were in the military in Vietnam. I experienced both of those. One of the things I learned is that nobody needs a pistol. Nobody needs a pistol. And to succumb to the influence, the persuasion of groups like the National Rifle Association, and to allow citizens to carry concealed weapons is certainly not the issue that we're here to talk about today. But one wonders how many of people would be bloody and broken nose and alive, with a broken nose and alive, if we didn't let politicians be seduced by the National Rifle Association and others. I was a Marine. I've had a shotgun my whole life. Nobody needs a pistol. You just don't need them, and to allow so many people in the United States to walk around, as they say, packing heat, is a crime. It's a sacrilege. It's ridiculous, and that's something we could do. We could change that. We could make that much less of a common occurrence just by making our elected officials vote down some of these ridiculous laws.
I'm glad you mentioned that and Tatiana mentioned that, because not only is this a race issue and people who are skeptical of our judicial system, and they have every right to be skeptical and cynical about our judicial system given some of these cases, but we are in a state that passes 39-0, and then in the Florida House, and then went to the Senate and passed overwhelmingly, and then signed by Governor Bush at the time. That we are in, and then 20 other states, because of the NRA, have adopted this law. That we are in a state now where doctors are prohibited from asking parents if there are guns in the house. There's legislation on the books here in Florida that we are now having legislation to have that you can carry guns on college campuses. That we have created a society that has emboldened people to shoot first and ask questions later. So when you get into a racist person, we're just putting gasoline, I think, on the fire. So I think that, yeah, this is another issue Coupled with that, we live in this 24/7 media frenzy now. So there are a lot of things that make this a unique case that's talked about, unlike any other I've witnessed where people have walked out of school in droves all over the country, not just in Miami-Dade County. And Trayvon was a student at Michael Croft Senior High School, right up the street here. And we had students that walked 40 miles the other day to Sanford to commemorate the 40th anniversary. So I do think that the gun culture is a really big part of and what makes such a crazy, zany state.
Okay. Two things. One, Tatiana, the McDuffie case that you talked about, there is a connection. In Black History Month, his daughter was honored by us, and she was selected as the most outstanding Black female teacher in the United States. There's something that has not been mentioned in our discussion, and I think it has to be brought front and center to the discussion. That if we and I say if we accuse Zimmerman of racism, Zimmerman is the poster boy of institutional racism, and the real racists in this case is not Zimmerman, it's the police department of Sanford. Because from the very minute that they arrived on the scene, their every action up to the time when Zimmerman, well, not up to the time when Zimmerman was released, but up to the time when the police chief temporarily stepped down, smacks of racism. I mean, all that they did was in an effort to protect a young man. Well, no, I don't think so much that they were protecting Zimmerman as much as their overriding action was that they were being unjust to the dead black boy. And we cannot overlook that they chose to behave that way towards a young man who was dead because of his race. And so when we try Zimmerman in the court of public justice, that we have to try the police department of Sanford.
Not to not agree with you, Dr. Bailey. My sense of, and what I've been media is it wasn't the police department that did not want to order President Zimmerman, it was the prosecutor. And the point that I'm going to make is we don't know what happened that night. We are subject to the whims of the news media that is going to tell us anything they feel like telling us. Whether it is to incense people, whether it is to cover up, deliberately change a set of facts, sell more papers. They do as they well please, and we accept them with willy-willy as being gospel, and they're not. And we have to challenge them before we go rushing to judgment, call this a race issue, justifiable homicide, whatever. We have no clue what happened that night.
We do have one clue.
We don't have
I saw hands.
I did have a comment, whether you think it's a race issue or not, there is, I think goes back to what Dr. Bailey was saying about attitude. There is something about this man's attitude, and I don't know, I think it also goes to what Tatiana said about the law, the standard on law. There is something that makes you feel, that gives you the right to say, you know what, this is a problem, it's all our issues, as if we see something that we don't like, then we go and report it to the police. When we take it into our own hands and say, well, now the police said don't do anything, but I'm now going to say, there's some kind of attitude that you have that makes you think that you have the right to do that. And so there is, whether it's the standard on law or whatever it is, there's something that makes you feel that you have the right to pull out your gun and shoot an unarmed person. There's an attitude about that, and you can call it whatever you want to call it, but there's an attitude. Sorry.
Yes.
I was going to say, if that was a young, I can't discount racism, because if that was a young, if Trayvon was white instead of black, He would not have been followed. He would not have been shot. This would not have happened. It would have just been a young white boy walking through the neighborhood, even if it was at night, even if he had on a hood. This would not have happened. So you can't, even though he might have been a crazy man,